talking about and you want to talk about that, oh, got it. Then we could do that, but we could also just do a more open dialogue at the end. We'll have like a forum where we can talk more openly, but not necessarily a forum in the middle. So with that said, I think I'll go ahead and start because we have quite a bit of material, plus we want to talk. So welcome everyone to this 2021 Needs Assessment Special Study presentation. I am Garett Switzer. I conducted the research activities and report for the 2021 Needs Assessment Special Study. I'm now with TDH. Oh, let's see. Am I doing this? There we go. Oh, so I'm now with TDH, but as the Quality Management Director for Part B, which I was consulting on the last few years, but this presentation, I'm not TDH folk. I'm just the researcher for the last special study. So the first thing I wanted to start with today was just the acknowledgement section, because you guys know that this project is such a heavy lift, and it requires so much collaboration and participation of everyone on this committee, all of our case managers, all the United Way staff, the Tennessee Department of Health, who does the EPI profile, and of course consumers. So it's impossible to overstate how essential each of you are to every single one of these processes, not only this last year, but going forward. And, oh, we got a talker. There we go. So yeah, I just want to put a huge thank you to everyone, because this was a challenging one this last year. And I want you to know that I'm a small component of this, the person that writes it, but everyone else is very all the activity. Thank you for that. Just a quick background of the study, even though most of you know it. This committee reviewed data and past needs assessments, as well as surveillance and continuum of care data, in addition to recommendations from past needs assessments for future studies. And based on all this information, it was decided that a special study be done to assess the needs and service priorities of people living with HIV aged 18 to 34. You can see here that the justification when we talk about how this age group has the lowest engagement rates and viral suppression rates and linkage to care rates. So it's really important that we better understand what their needs are and what their barriers are, so that we can better serve them and improve the health outcomes for this subpopulation. I'm not going to talk a lot about COVID, but I know I don't have to explain COVID to this group. I'm sure none of us have been living under a rock for the past 2 years, so we all know how it's changed everything. In the context of this needs assessment, though, it continued to really affect research activities this last year. You might remember that we had a surge in the late summer and fall, which was when a lot of our research activities, like our survey collection, our key informant interviews, were happening. And that surge led to more social distancing measures. And of course, that meant that we also didn't get a chance to send in-person interviewers into the field again to collect client surveys. We also didn't conduct in-person focus groups, and we did them over the phone. And then I also wanted to say that I get the sense that there's a general just COVID-19 fatigue and depression and anxiety that impacts people's willingness to participate in any extra voluntary activity. It's my belief that this fatigue is not exclusive to consumers, but also with our providers and just all of us, to be frank. And there's just a sense of people being overwhelmed. And it's hard to quantify that in the study because that's not what the focus was, but I'm just thinking informally that it did have an impact on the research activities this last year. So having said all that, let's start with a quick review of the EPI data. I don't want to go too deep in the EPI data, but just give a brief sort of overview and also frame the conversation around that 18 to 34-year-old population here in Tennessee. As always, with the epi review and surveillance data that we get, there's a bit of a lag with the data. So the data in the report, was the most recent available, and it was current through 2019. So that's the data that's used in the report and the data that you're going to see in this presentation today. So here are some overall trends. You see, again, I want to emphasize that for our conversation today, we're talking about the 4 planning regions, which is East, Southeast, Middle, and West. So we're excluding that Southwest region. And so the total number of people living with HIV in those 4 planning regions is 11,162. The total number of people living with HIV in the 4 regions decreased actually from 2018 to 2019, and it was the first decrease in the last several years. The middle region continues to have the largest share of people living with HIV, accounting for more than half. And it's increased every year from 2015 through 2019, excuse me. Over 60% of people living with HIV across all 4 regions are age 45 and older. So we have an older HIV population that makes up the majority in our state. And the total number of newly diagnosed people with HIV in the 4 regions was 507 in 2019. And I suspect that in the future, we're going to see an uptick after COVID. And people aged 15 to 34 account for about 57% of all new diagnosed people living with HIV. So that's where a lot of our new folks are coming from. So this graph provides an illustration of that overall number that I talked about and that slight decrease in the total number of people living with HIV in the 4 regions from 2018 to 2019. You can see from the graph that the number of people living with HIV has had a pretty steady increase year over year in the previous 4 years, and then just took that slight dip from 2018 to 2019. This chart shows the total number of people living with HIV in the East region from 2015 to 2019. As you can see, it's a year-over-year increase for the past 5 years up through 2019. This chart shows the total in the middle region. Again, we see a year-over-year increase for the past 5 years up through 2019. But as you can see from this chart, there was really an exponential growth from 2017 to 2018, and then a very slight modest increase from 2018 to 2019 in terms of people with HIV in the middle region. In the Southeast region, you can see this chart looks very different than the previous 2. There was a year-over-year increase from 2015 to 2018. There was a significant increase from 2017 to 2018, and then there was a significant decrease in the total number of people living with HIV from 2018 to 2019. Finally, we see the total number of people living with HIV in the West region. This chart shows that the number of people living with HIV in the West region is much more varied than other regions. We see a little bit of an ebb and flow with slight increases and slight decreases in numbers from 2015 through 2019, and then a decrease from 2018 to 2019 again. So what does the epi data show us about some populations or other interesting trends? We see that there's a consistent theme in the state that the non-Hispanic Black population accounts for almost 40% of the total HIV population. So it's disproportionately affecting our non-Hispanic Black population here in Tennessee. It's the non-Hispanic Black population is also the largest subpopulation in the West region when you stratify by race/ethnicity. This is the only region where it makes up the largest subpopulation. Also, nearly 40% of all newly diagnosed people living with HIV are non-Hispanic Black. So HIV in Tennessee is still something that disproportionately affects that non-Hispanic Black population in our state when we stratify by race and ethnicity. Another interesting thing is that the number of people with HIV identifying as Hispanic in the East region has increased every year from 2015 to 2019. The Hispanic population of people living with HIV in the middle region has also had an 11% increase since 2017. So that's something to consider for those regions and for the purposes of maybe some future special studies. This chart illustrates people living with HIV broken down by race and ethnicity in 2019. And as you can see, the total number of non-Hispanic white people living with HIV still accounts for the largest subpopulation in the 4 planning regions. This chart shows the total number of people living with HIV in the 4 planning regions in 2019 broken down by gender. As you can see from the chart, cisgendered males account for a large majority of the total population of people living with HIV across the 4 planning regions. When we look at new diagnoses, you can see that the non-Hispanic white population accounts for a plurality of new diagnoses at 48% of all new diagnoses in 2019. The non-Hispanic Black population accounts for 38%, and the Hispanic population accounts for 10% of all new diagnoses. So now looking at the 18 to 34-year-old population, since that's the focus of our special study, the total number of people living with HIV age 18 to 34 across the 4 regions in 2019 was 2,215. The total number of people living with HIV in the subpopulation increased every year from 2015 through 2019. The non-Hispanic Black population accounts for a majority of people living with HIV in that 18 to 34-year-old age group. So that's unlike the overall HIV population, where the non-Hispanic white makes up the plurality of all cases. Also, cisgender males account for 83% of all people living with HIV in this 18 to 34-year-old age group. This chart provides an illustration of the total number of people living with HIV age 18 to 34 across the 4 planning regions from 2015 through 2019. As you can see, there's a year-over-year increase, and it's a pretty steady increase. No real jumps, no real huge growth, but steady year over year. This chart illustrates that the race/ethnicity distribution of people living with HIV age 18 to 34 in 2019. Again, you can see that the majority of folks with HIV in this age range are the non-Hispanic Black population, but this is that racial breakdown. So I see some things in the chat. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh yeah, we're asking about the hard copy of the needs assessment reports. Yes, I believe that's going to go out to everyone.
It will. I'm monitoring the chat so you can focus on presenting.
Oh, I appreciate that. I assumed you were, but I just wanted to take a moment to pause. I didn't think anyone would have EPI questions, but I provided that EPI overview so we can move on to the real meat of all of it now. So let's see, let's talk about the client survey here. The survey was developed under the guidance of this committee. As in previous years, hard copies were distributed to Ryan White Part B funded service providers. An electronic version was created in SurveyMonkey, and we tried to get the electronic version out using flyers containing the QR code and distributing those flyers to Part B service providers. And as we've done in the last few needs assessments, we provided a Spanish language option for the survey, both in hard copy and an electronic survey. Oh wait, I think I jumped ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I double clicked. That was that one. So I got a little bit ahead of myself, but those were the bullet points for the last one. So it was tough getting survey responses this year. You can see the numbers here we had were a little low. The total number of surveys completed was only 76, and 32 of those were completed by individuals who indicated that they were actually outside the age parameters of the study. So in the end, the total number of usable surveys was only 41. And so, and there's a little bit of gap in there because the electronic survey, we put a qualifying question at the beginning that asked a yes or no, are you between the ages of 18 and 34? And respondents can select yes, and then it would take them to the survey, or they can select no, and it would say, thank you for your interest. And you know, this survey is not for you, but we encourage you to participate next year. And we had a number of folks, like 5 to 10, that hit yes, and then they got taken to the survey, but then they just never answered any of the other questions. So I don't know where the disconnect was on that, because we did trial it, and a lot of folks obviously clicked yes and then got taken to the survey and complete it. But yeah, so those were unusable surveys as well. So total number of usable surveys was only 41. And given that low response rate, that means that the confidence interval is 80% with a margin of error of 10%. And for those of you who don't do research or don't do statistics, what this means is, you know, in this form of research, we use inferential statistics. That means we sample a portion of the population, and then we use their responses to make inferences about the total population. So in this case, with such a small sample size, there's less certainty that the people who were sampled are actually representative of the overall population. So it's important to note that as we review the results of this survey, we know that there is a reduced likelihood that the thoughts and opinions that were captured in this survey represent the opinions of all people living with HIV aged 18 to 34 in Tennessee.
So Garett, do you want questions now or later? Because it was pertaining to that slide about the margin of error. So is it a statistically significant survey?
Yeah, so again, the answer to that is yes, but with a confidence interval of 80%, which is generally kind of low. So usually when doing you know, sample populations and inferential statistics, you want to have more of like a 95% confidence interval. And then you'd want your margin of error to also be low, more about like 5 to 3%. But I mean, it's exactly kind of what it sounds like, Mark, to answer your question, is basically like, if you ask me, how sure are you that, you know, Mia's opinions represent the opinions of other people? And I say, I'm only 80% sure with a margin of error of 10%. Whereas, you know, if I sampled so many people and you ask me that same question, well, how confident are you that people you sampled reflect the views of the general population? I would say, oh, I'm 95% confident with very little margin of error. So yeah, it's still statistically significant, but again, the confidence of that is lower than it would be if we had sampled more people. So, I think that's the only question. Here you see some of the profile characteristics of the respondents. Oh, did I get a?
He just said thank
thanks.
you.
Okay. Yeah, here you see some of the profile characteristics of the respondents. A majority of the respondents came from the middle region. About 80% of the respondents indicated that their gender identity was male, and 15 indicated female. The remaining 5% indicated that their gender identity was not listed as a potential response. So it is possible that people who identify as transgender are not represented in this sample. The majority of respondents identified as Black or African American, which mirrors roughly the race/ethnicity breakdown of people living with HIV in the 18 to 34-year-old age group across Tennessee. And finally, about 10% of respondents indicated that they identify as Hispanic Latino, Latina, Latinx. So, there we go. Here you see this chart that shows the percentage of respondents who indicated that they were virally suppressed. As you can see in the chart, that number is about 70%, with about a little under 20% saying they were not. Roughly 15% indicated that they did not know their viral load status. And I thought that was interesting, as it seemed a little high to me. And so I tried to explore that more with the questions that we developed for the key informant interviews, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. This chart shows that over 85% of respondents indicated that they were linked to HIV medical care within 3 months after diagnosis. What's a little concerning is that 5% indicated that it took them more than a year to link to care. And if you combine that with the 6 month to 1 year time frame, that's 10% of all respondents who indicated that it took them more than 6 months to link to care. So that's a little high. When it came to accessing support services, you can see from this table that these percentages are much different than accessing HIV medical care. While 85% indicated that they were linked to medical care within 3 months, only about 53% indicated that they started accessing support services in that same 3-month time frame, or that, yeah. So a lot lower. And also nearly 15% indicated that they have never accessed support services. You can see from this chart that nearly 80% of respondents indicated that it was easy to get connected with HIV service providers after diagnosis. I think it's encouraging that less than 5% of respondents either disagreed or strongly disagreed that it was, easy. And in fact, no one actually strongly disagreed with that statement. So that's a good sign. When it comes to navigating the system, I also found it interesting that people in this age group continually indicated that they rely on their doctor or their healthcare provider to educate them on the services that are available. And they're actually less reliant on self-research and internet searches. This was also a theme that came up a lot in the key informant interviews. You see that nearly 10% still indicated that they don't know which HIV services are available to them. And that was also one of the themes from the key informant interviews as well. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the portion of the survey that tried to dig into some of those barriers for that 18 to 34-year-old population. This chart illustrates the reasons that respondents gave for missing an HIV medical appointment. As you can see, they were able to select multiple options if it was applicable. The plurality of respondents indicated that they missed appointments because they forgot, or because they have, they had another work, school, or social engagement. Just below that, you can see that 35% of respondents indicated that transportation issues have caused them to miss appointments. And the other thing of note is over a quarter of respondents indicated that depression or anxiety has caused them to miss a medical appointment. And you can also see here that 9 respondents selected the other option, which then piped them to an open-ended response if they wanted to give one. And all 9 respondents who selected the other option wrote in answers that indicated that they never miss appointments. When asked what makes it difficult for respondents to access HIV support services, you see that the most popular answer was that they don't need any services. They also, this was also a common refrain in the key informant interviews as well. Depression and anxiety was the second most popular reason given by respondents for not accessing HIV support services. As with the last question, the respondents were able to select multiple options if applicable. So that's why you see a lot of high numbers here. Again, 9 respondents selected the other option. One of those indicated transportation. One indicated a lack of Spanish-speaking providers. One indicated a fear of stigma. One indicated that they don't know what services are available. And the remaining indicated that this question was not applicable to them. So when asked about barriers to ART adherence, you can see from this table that the most popular response was that the respondent simply forgot to take their medication. Some indicated side effects were the reason for not taking medication, while 9% indicated that it was an issue of access. 8 respondents indicated that, or selected the other option. And of those, 1 indicated that they were incarcerated and didn't have access. 1 said a delivery issue, which would also fall under access. And the remaining 6 indicated that this was not applicable to them. So now we're going to talk a little bit about attitudes, about services. So these were actually pretty positive responses. We asked, we wanted to see how clients in this, or consumers in this population view the services that they are accessing and the service providers. And so when we asked them if they feel that HIV service providers understand the difficulties of living with HIV at their age, you can see that, over 80, or roughly 80% of respondents indicated that they agree. While I think it was only 2% said that they disagree, and not a single person indicated that they strongly disagree with that statement. So clients really feel like their service providers understand what they're going through, which I think is positive.
Hey, Garett, before you move to your next slide, you had a question. I guess it goes back to 2 more slides. How was support services explained to respondents?
That's a good question. So we had questions in there that were ordered in a way where we asked them what support services they access. And so it gave like an overview of what support services look like early on in the survey. And so then they saw a list of different ones and they can select which ones they tend to access. And then in subsequent questions, we just asked support services. In the past surveys, we've said things like, when it comes to questions about accessing support services, then we'd put things like in parentheses and we'd say such as transportation or food or, housing assistance. But we didn't do that this time because I think the committee felt that maybe saying support services after explaining what support services were in previous questions, then that would be sufficient. We're always very concerned about length of survey and length of question. So we try and do it as efficiently as possible. I hope that answers your question. And if it does, I will move on. But yeah, I don't know if this person's from Department of Child and Family Services. I don't know if you're new to this committee or to this process, but this client survey is developed by the committee and under the guidance of the committee. So we review every single question. We draft we talk about wording a lot. Then I drafted a version of it, sent it out to the committee so they can review. They have weeks to review. Then we had a meeting where we went over every single question and the wording. So this committee is hugely influential in the way that these questions are worded on these client surveys. So again, when asked, I have all access to all the services I need to stay healthy. You can see that again, really high numbers. 80% indicated that they agree with that statement, while only 10% said that they disagree, and not a single client said that they strongly disagree with that statement, which is, again, a consistent sort of refrain that we saw in the other questions, and that I'll talk about more in the key informant interviews, that a lot of folks in this age group just continually said, I have access to all the services I need. I'm not looking for any more services. I'm good from a service standpoint. Did that go? Okay. And with the quality of the services, again, high marks. We saw, gosh, 90% of all respondents indicate that they're satisfied with the quality of their HIV services that they are receiving. And again, it was only 2% that disagree with that statement, and not a single client said that they disagreed and were unhappy with the quality of their statement. It looks like we got a question. Here's the question. However, I see the population I work with and realize their view. I'm going to read out loud. I see the population I work with and realize their views of support services is limited, because after saying they need nothing, I get a transportation or food request. Yes, I agree with that as well. So again, we try, and that's one of the reasons why we do things like the focus groups and why those are more important. Because yeah, sometimes you read a survey, even as a respondent, and you might look at these things, and it might vary by your day or the hour that you're having or whatever. You might look at a question and be like, I don't need any services. And then digging deep into that in the qualitative data capture with the focus groups of the key informant interviews, sometimes you get more fleshed out views of that. But I totally agree. There's sometimes a disconnect. There's sometimes discordance in what people say from one question to the next. Sometimes we have these surveys and people say, I don't need any services. And then later we ask them a similar question and it's like, oh yeah, I need rental assistance. I need housing assistance. I need food. I need transportation. So it's true that even within the same survey, respondents' answers are sometimes discordant. So again, yeah, strong marks when asked about the quality of their HIV services. So folks in this age group that responded to the survey were very happy with their service providers, very happy with the quality of their services and the access to the services that they have. Not a single person disagreed with this statement. Only 2% said they disagree with it. Or not a single person said they strongly disagree. Only 2% said they disagree. So yeah, strong marks in terms of views about the services that they are accessing. So when asked about which of the following HIV support services do you currently use or have used in the past, you can see here, again, they were allowed to select multiple options, anything that applies. And, some of these things are sort of broad, and there's lots of different types of subservices, such as food, for example, but we keep them broad so that we don't have a million options for them to select. And you can see here that the most popular one was food service, and then followed by transportation, and then dental. And we had 7 respondents select the other option. And again, that gave them an open-ended to explain. And of the 7 other responses, 1 said counseling, 1 said utility bills, and the remaining said that this question was not applicable to them. Oh yeah, and I'd also say that I did find this interesting because, again, talking about that discordance, addressing that, we just talked about, it was interesting to me that, transportation was accessed by 54% of the respondents, and yet 80 to 90% of respondents said that they were satisfied by the quality of their services. Because often when we do broad needs assessment, people voice a lot of displeasure with transportation assistance, and similar with dental. And you see that nearly 50% of this group accessed dental services, and they still indicated that they were satisfied with the quality. But those of you who have sat on past needs assessments presentations might know that dental is one of the things that often gets highlighted as something that people aren't satisfied with. So I thought that was interesting as well, when we talk about that sort of disconnect. So what would you change? We had these open-ended questions. You know, we talked a lot about this in the committee. We wanted to include a lot of open-ended questions to give respondents a chance to maybe provide a little bit more insight than they normally would with just multiple choice. So we asked, what would you change about HIV care in Tennessee to improve your experience? They didn't have to answer these questions. We got 27 responses. 8 respondents said that they would not change anything. That was the plurality. 3 respondents said that they wanted to improve or increase transportation assistance. 2 said that they, indicated they need better system navigation or finding out what sort of services are available and where to get them. And then 1 person said food, 1 person said support groups, 1 person said utility bills. And then the remaining responses, if you're thinking those don't add up to 27, was kind of not sort of worthwhile to share. Some things are just frustration. And some things were just comments, like general comments. So I thought they were interesting, but they weren't.
Here you have a
a chat.
yes. It's regarding
Maybe jumping ahead, but my brief reading shows that when articulated, food, transportation, mental health, and dental were the highest unmet need. Yeah, so you're talking about in the unmet needs analysis. Yeah, that is true. That's often the case. But yeah, I don't know, Mark, if that, if you've obviously set in some unmet needs presentations from the state, and that is true. And we're in the process of another needs assessment, and I think we're also starting a dental task force group because we really need to focus a lot of resources on figuring out what's going on with dental. We're definitely in the next needs assessment also trying to really focus on mental health. And so that's what I can say to that right now. What HIV related services or activities help you live a healthy life? So this was kind of interesting to me. 7 respondents said food, 5 said counseling or support services, and then 5 respondents said that exercise or gym membership, some sort of group exercise or gym membership would help them, which I think is interesting because that's not something I thought about very much, but then it made a lot of sense because this is a younger population, might be a little bit more active. And then 4 respondents indicated that dental, and then 1 person wrote that they need home delivery of meds so they don't have to go to the pharmacy and miss work. Okay. Then we just had a last one, just any other comments you'd like to share. 1 person wrote the same thing on every single question, which is that they want to get emails or calls instead of mail because there's nosy people in his life, and he wanted no snail mail because he thinks that people will go through his mail. So I put that on there so that that person's voice could be heard. 1 person indicated that they wanted to check the quality of food that's being distributed. And then 1 person said that they want easier access to rental assistance. So again, we had low numbers for key informant interviews as well. We had 8 participants for key informant interviews. Every single region was represented though, and questions were designed to get a deeper dive into the personal experiences. Some questions were informed by early responses that we had from the client surveys. We had about 25 client surveys already completed when we were developing the key informant interview protocols. And so like one of the examples of that was the viral suppression one, that we wanted to know why, such a high number of people didn't know their viral load status. So almost all participants, so these are like the general themes. Almost all participants indicated that they feel that it's easy to manage their HIV, and that being HIV positive has had little impact on their life. Most participants indicated that they had other priorities that impacted their ability to attend medical visits. But interestingly enough, they all were very adamant in particular that they never miss a dose of ART medication. So it's kind of like, just because they have other things that they might prioritize over going to the doctor, it doesn't mean they don't prioritize managing their HIV. It just means that for them, it's sort of about taking a pill and managing like a chronic illness, but they're going to prioritize all the other things in their life above going for support services or going to medical visits or things like that. Mental health was or is currently a barrier to care for all but one participant. Participants spoke very openly about being depressed, especially immediately after diagnosis. Almost all of them indicated that after their diagnosis, they went through at least some sort of prolonged period of depression. And only 2 participants of all of the people interviewed were even familiar with the term viral suppression or the concept of what it means to be virally suppressed. So I thought that was interesting. And also, every single person interviewed said they were familiar with the concept of being undetectable. So it sounds like we've done a good job in the state of U equals U education. Every single person in this 18 to 34-year-old age group said their goal is not viral suppression, because they didn't even know what that is. Their goal is to be undetectable and untransmittable and just live their life. So I thought that was interesting. Sort of a shift, because I know a lot of our doing these needs assessments, a lot of our older folks who, especially our long-term survivors and things like that, are very familiar with viral suppression, getting their viral load under control and this and that. Whereas our younger folks are like, I don't even know what that is. I'm just trying to take my pill and not have a detectable viral load, and that's it. So of the key informant interviews, broken down by region, I picked like the most salient points that were talked about the most by, the people who were interviewed. In the East, transportation assistance was the most talked about issue. One respondent receives, but they're for slightly different reasons. One receives gas cards, but he doesn't own a vehicle. And one has had trouble getting any sort of transportation assistance at all, but both indicated that that was their main barrier and their main frustration. In the middle region, all the participants in the middle region either worked and or attended school. One worked and attended school. And it made scheduling medical visits very, very, very difficult. The one said the only reason he attends medical visits is he works very near to his medical service provider, and otherwise he would absolutely just never go and just go to work. And so that was the characteristic of the middle region. In the Southeast, spoke a lot about not liking having a separate medical provider for HIV care and having to go to their primary care for other issues, and how that's just an added burden of time for them. They just don't have a lot of time because they have so many other things going on. And then in the West, the participants said that they had access to all the services they needed, and they were totally satisfied with the services, and HIV has had little impact on their lives. So here are some key, some like interesting quotes I feel like from these key informant interviews that sort of articulate some of the things I just talked about, but really I think hammer home the points. Timing is an issue. I work full time. My doctor doesn't have the hours that accommodate my schedule. A lot of people talked about dental, as always. Again, there's that disconnect between people saying they're satisfied with services, and then we get them on the phone and they just talk a lot about services that they don't like. So dental stuff needs to improve. I have lots of stuff that needs to be taken care of, but I just can't seem to get any dental care anymore. And when talking about HIV, this was the really surprising thing to me, is how many people had this very, very, very similar expression. And it was that it is like a moderate inconvenience. I know that I have to stay on top of ordering my meds, and that's about it. It doesn't really severely impact my life. Meeting other people who are HIV positive has been a strong support. And then another person said, it is what it is, and I just have to take a pill every day, and it didn't impact my life at all. And then another person said, I manage everything day by day pretty well. When I first found out, I was devastated, but after the initial devastation, everything is fine. And I think what I'd also add that I didn't include on the slide, what was interesting is there was 3 people who said that they do want more counseling services, but not for them, but they want it for their family members and friends, because their family members and friends were more devastated than they were after their diagnosis. And it was hard to like communicate. They didn't know if they had the tools necessarily to be able to communicate to their family and friends and their loved ones that they're going to be fine, and reassure their family and friends of that. So I thought that was interesting, because there was like, oh yeah, we need more support service, not for me, but for these other people in my life who it's actually affected. So, you know, because an HIV diagnosis does affect more than just the individual, it affects the people in their lives as well. I see we have a chat. I like that gas cards are being provided to individuals despite not owning a car. Is important so that they can provide gas to peers and friends to provide transportation when available, especially within this age range. That's true. So yeah, based on study, my recommendations are that we have extended hours for HIV medical services to meet the needs of this 18 to 34-year-old population, you know, especially as they've often indicated that they have very active, busy lives. And if you have an 8 to 5, 8 to 4 option to see a medical service provider, that just doesn't accommodate. They prioritize work, they prioritize school, they won't prioritize their HIV medical visits. Increase access to mental health services. So many people indicated that they wanted support group, or indicated that depression and anxiety was a barrier to care. And increase efficacy of transportation assistance. I see that there's a chat right here. Just as a comment, as a long-term survivor, it's heartening to hear the resilience of this population, and that they don't feel that HIV as unmanageable as we used to find it. Yeah, Mark, I think that that's true. That's the thing that really struck me when doing this study, was just, you know, it's kind of shocking, because I work obviously with the entire HIV population, and especially those long-term survivors that were diagnosed in the 80s, 90s, and watched their friends and loved ones maybe pass away from the illness. And, you know, they went on disability. They didn't know if they were going to pass away from the illness. And, you know, that's how they lived their life for decades. And to see how far it's come, where this 18 to 34-year-old population is basically telling me in these focus groups is, I take a pill and I don't think about it very much. And then I just want to be undetectable, so I don't have to think about it ever. Oh, I can talk about that one in a second, that dental question. Hang on one second, let me get through this, and then we'll do a more open conversation, because I only have 2 more slides. So I'm not ignoring that slide. So my recommendation for the actual needs assessments, because this is an ongoing thing, special studies are an ongoing thing that we do year after year. Better coordination with Part A needs assessment activities. We found out that Part A was doing a study at the exact same time they sent out their client survey. So our Part A and middle. So our providers who are funded for Part A and Part B, who we both were using them to distribute and collect surveys, and then they were confused, like, wait, which is which, or I thought I already had this. And so yeah, better coordination with Part A for sure. I'm excited to resume in-person focus groups in lieu of key informant interviews. I think it's been really hard the last couple years getting folks to want to participate in a phone interview. I spoke about the difficulties of that this last year. You know, we live in a world where if you have a cell phone and you get a call from a number you don't recognize, you don't pick it up. And so reaching these people on the phone has been really difficult, but we've had a lot of success in the past by doing, hey, we're going to be at this location at this time. We'll have lunch. We have transportation assistance where you can get to and from the location. And then we get 10 to 20 to 30 people in some cases showing up at these places. So you get that more diverse perspective and just more qualitative feedback than these phone interviews, which are really, really hard to get people to participate in. Excuse me. And then the increase of marketing client surveys. And that includes sending out in-person interviewers. I think as COVID restrictions have relaxed in the state and we are, what do we call now, a low risk, a no risk state by the CDC, something like that. So that means that we can do in-person interviewers. You know, in-person interviewers for client survey collection has been really instrumental in getting hundreds of client surveys in the past. And so I think that that's going to be a huge thing going forward if we can get people back out into the field. Because it's hard to just put a, you know, as fancy as we can make a flyer and a QR code and all that stuff. I think it's hard to get people to access electronic surveys or take home a paper survey. But getting that person in, you know, face to face and with a tablet or whatever and collecting that information will go a long way. And then finally, recommendations for future studies. Yeah, again, people with HIV 18 to 34, we had a low response rate. So we can't be 100% confident that the responses that we got reflect the general population of people living with HIV 18 to 34. So we might still need future studies to get the finger on the pulse of what's happening with that population. And maybe transportation, as that was indicated as one of the top barriers for clients in this group, not only in the client survey, but also in the key informant interviews. You know, it was inadequate transportation was the third most frequently cited reason for missing an HIV medical appointment. Despite that, the fact that over 50% of the survey respondents claimed to have received transportation assistance. So something's happening there with the disconnect between the efficacy of transportation assistance. So now I can get to, I would like to open it up for questions so you can unmute yourself. I'll start though, get the ball rolling by reading this one that's been sitting here for a minute. That says, what are some of the challenges of getting dental services for the clients? Just curious. Well, that's a whole can of worms. So I can say that from the state perspective, and this again, I think goes beyond my my hat of the author of this last needs assessment report. So I don't want to get too deep into that, but I know that the state is also wondering the same thing, that they are convening a dental task force, because even though they've tried to expand access by bringing more people into getting coverage, our uptake, our usage is still low. Yeah, so the lottery is not the way to run access. 100% agree with that, Mark. And you know who also agrees with this? HRSA. We're not going to do a lottery in the future. So we're always working to expand access. But again, these dental questions are maybe a little bit on a different, for a different call maybe. But yeah, if we want to talk about, you know, the 18 to 34, but yes, I encourage anyone who is expressing concerns about dental to, you can reach out to me even. I can help connect you to the dental task force, and you can put your thoughts into that committee. Any questions on the slides, or anyone just want to talk, any thoughts on, you know, I know we have a lot of providers on this call. anyone want to say their experiences with the 18 and 34-year-old that maybe confirm some of the things that we talked about today, maybe is even, you know, in opposition, or maybe you have a different experience with some of the 18 to 34-year-olds that you work with?
You have a question in the chat.
Hey there, Garrett. Regarding trying to get in-person interviews with this population, if the recent survey said they are too busy working and don't have to make their medical appointments, then how can you schedule an in-person interview with this population? You know what? That is a great point. I agree with that 100%. It would be a hard thing that would require a lot of strategic thought and how to solicit increased survey responses from that population. You know, we talked about this with those of you on this committee. We talked about this going into this. We knew it would be hard to solicit responses. And the reason it would be hard was the exact reason that we were going after this subpopulation, because we don't have a good finger on the pulse, because they don't participate in a lot of our forums and a lot of our feedback mechanisms. They don't provide a lot of survey responses for other needs assessments. So we did learn, we did know that going into it, that this would be a tough population to reach, and it continues to be. I admit that. So yeah, I think I think new strategies for this upcoming needs assessment. I know that we're trying to really expand the types of venues that we're marketing the survey in, so that hopefully we can reach more younger folks living with HIV. But yeah, we're always looking for ideas and always strategizing about different ways to meet, to get insight from this population. Okay, people who want to be on the dental task force, I will gladly connect you to that. Yeah, I think Mia, you also have that dental task force flyer information from Melinda. Okay.
Yes, so we can send that information out that Melinda sent out yesterday.
I know we only have a couple more minutes. I think the best way to capture the subpopulation is to go where they are and think about who has approached them. Yes, I agree with that, Beverly. You know, one of the other things I would also emphasize is just there are a lot of people in that younger population that might not be super active in some of the existing HIV social communities that we have, but that doesn't mean they're not active. And there are things like advocacy events or protests or marches, or, you know, Pride was a huge thing. And like those things were also toned down because of COVID, where we can normally send interviewers into the field for something like Pride, for example, and solicit survey responses. But yeah, it's true. We're always looking for different venues to market the survey other than just Part B service providers, especially if they're not going to their medical appointments and they don't access other types of support services. And then we have more people wanting to be in the oral health task force. I'm glad I plugged the oral health task force. I didn't know it'd be that was the main takeaway of this meeting, this unintended outcome of this meeting. Does anyone have any other questions on the on any of the content, any comments? I'd love to hear it. If you want to unmute yourself instead of just writing in the chat box, this is your chance. I miss seeing you all in person, but I would love to hear your voices.
Mark, this is Mary Jones. I'm with Children and Family Services, and I appreciate your time, your efforts, and your everything you do for the needs assessment. And this is just a comment that I experience from day to day, because I'm in the rural area and the grassroots services. It's great to get feedback from people that that's living with HIV. But what I find is when we go out and talk with people, it's the uninformed. Maybe it's because of, and I wish I could say why, but you know, we live in a low poverty area. But it's the uninformed, those that don't want to talk, those that if you have not established a bond and they are truly trusting in you, you can't find out what you need to know. And I don't know how to address that. I just wanted to make that comment, because when you get key informants, when you get people willing to do in-person interviews or even any type of virtual or electronic interview, those are individuals that have some concept. And when we're trying to help individuals who, you're bringing them up from the very start, it's just that I can't talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I just need your help. And as you begin to establish a bond and trust, you find out stuff. For example, like dental, it's like, well, there's dental services. Well, I don't have a toothache, so I don't need to go to the dentist. So, I don't know what the answer is, but I know that probably in all cases, not just HIV, but everything, is how do we really get to find out what it is? And my last comment is, no matter how much mental health we have right now, I know that there's more. And I think it was great when that person said they need their family members and friends available for mental health services. Thank you.
Yeah, not even just one, but a few people said that they want counseling for their family members and friends. Before I address Jessica, just real fast before I forget. So Child and Family Services, I believe you all are in West region, right? And so sort of to address what you were saying in the context of the needs assessment, I agree that particularly in West, there's a high value on that face-to-face interaction. So for future needs assessments, I think to get that more qualitative data and from focus groups, it's going to be important to be in person, because I know that they're trying to do support groups in West, and they were trying to do them on Zoom, and they weren't getting traction. And then I heard from consumers that that's because they don't trust Zoom or doing these things over the phone or doing the things over the internet. So that really, from a needs, in the context of the needs assessment, that hindered some of our data collection from the West region, because those folks prefer that face-to-face interaction and that connection, and having those in-person focus groups as opposed to like, who's this person on the phone? Who's this person on the Zoom meeting? What, I don't want to tell them my experience, sort of thing. Jessica, can you go ahead?
So I was also going to kind of piggyback off of that with this age group and identifying that, yes, they do have a high resilience, but also noting how many of them also identified mental health as being a barrier of, are they actually being resilient, or are they, could they be also in a state of denial, and because they can maintain a small viral load or an undetectable load, that they can further kind of deny it and maybe not acknowledge it as much. Whereas like doing the surveys and all of that will kind of make it more real, etc.
Okay. So yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I can say that, and I just want to say before I go off on another one of my classic tangents, that it is 5 after the hour. So if you want to hop off, I don't mind staying on. I'm going to stay on until I've exhausted all the questions. If you have the time, but if you need to jump off, I don't take any offense. So I just want to be mindful of people's time. That's definitely why a huge push of mine, stepping into the role internally at TDH now, is to really look at access to mental health services for our Part B folks, and really trying to find innovative ways to increase that access to mental health services. There's a lot of evidence-based theory of change stuff behind this. For example, the more involved you are and retained in sort of high frequency services like mental health services that you might go to a monthly support group, the more likely you are to be involved in lower frequency services like HIV, medical appointments that you only go to once every 6 months, and then your engagement rates are up, and then your viral suppression rates are up. Also, mental health. There is no health without mental health. So I've made this a huge priority, and I think folks internally at TDH are making it a priority as well in the upcoming 5-year strategic plan. So I don't know if that directly addresses your question, but that's sort of what we're doing from a strategic perspective at TDH. Any other questions? Oh, I got one in the chat regarding dental, and a client that says she doesn't have a toothache, therefore I don't need to go to the dentist. I believe many clients need to be educated about why they need to go to the dentist, the importance of oral care, maintain hygiene, etc., so that they can prevent future dental problems. So explaining why going to the dentist is important may be beneficial when dealing with challenged clients. Yeah, that's 100% true. It always comes down to a little bit of education when addressing people's health needs. Yes, and dental certainly falls into that category. Any other questions or comments or anything while we're all on the call?
Yeah, I have something if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you, Mark.
Okay. One of the things that I've learned over time, and I go back to the old ACT UP days, I'm a long-term survivor, is that when we look at special populations and we consider what it takes to get more input from them, what it takes for us to get quality input from them, is we had a saying back in the ACT UP days that was taken over by the folks in harm reduction to mean the same thing: nothing about us without us. And that what we can do as a community planning group is extend our efforts to recruit people from the special populations that we're looking for to give input to our body, and also to then take the lead back out into their sub-communities to help us not only get information out to them and get access out to them, but to get information back from them about what's really important. So sometimes having a service provider as your ambassador to the community it poses risks and barriers in the beginning. Having somebody in and of that community can make a big difference.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, Mark. And, I think, you identified yourself as a long-term survivor. And the fact is that you're on this call, you're on this committee. We've had good representation of long-term survivors on these committees and similar committees. But one thing you might notice is we don't have a lot of young people with living HIV on a lot of these committees. And that would be really helpful too for the planning processes and getting that perspective on these committees. And that's something that I think that it's always a challenge. People's time is valuable. And that's something that we strive to do for not only the needs assessment committee, but I know for all of our committees, is to have that consumer feedback at that level to inform some of those activities. And yeah, that's certainly something that we're mindful of. So we're about 10 minutes past. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts? I really appreciate people who are unwilling, or people who are willing to unmute themselves and talk, or even if you're willing to flip on that camera, although you don't have to. It's not super early, so I don't know if anyone's like still in their PJs or anything. But if we don't have any more questions, I guess we can conclude. I can pass it back up to Mia or Nikki, or I can just conclude myself.
So one, thank you, Garrett, for all the work that you do and that you've done for the committee and with the committee. Like we started talking earlier, you have a wealth of knowledge from international HIV to Tennessee HIV, and it comes through with your passion. So just to let everybody know, that if you had not received the final version of the needs assessment, no worries, I will send it out. Garrett, we did have an ask for your PowerPoint presentation. If you could send that to me, I will also send it out, and I will send out, since this was recorded, I will send this out to you all as well. So that you are informed. We know that the committee felt that the youth population 18 to 34 was really hard to reach, and just to see, the barriers that we face just getting them interacting with us, but the information we did get, we were extremely grateful for. So there's a lot of work for us to do. There's a lot of work. I love how Mark, talked about him being a longtime survivor, that we pull on our longtime survivors to help bring in our youth as well. I think both populations need to work really cohesively together so that we can help get to zero in the state of Tennessee. So thank you all so much for staying on with us 12 after 11. If you don't have any other questions, have an amazing Friday. To all of my moms out there, for those who take care of, babies, pet babies, happy Mother's Day to all. So with that, you guys enjoy your weekend, and this presentation is concluded. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.